Wife by Jess. I'm your host, Jess Milliken. On this podcast, we focus on female offenders and what caused them to offend. While many of the cases we'll talk about involve violent crimes, we'll also cover less violent crimes committed by women because understanding why is just as important as understanding what. For those of you who listened to episode 1, the one with the axes, I hope that you guys found it as fascinating as I did. Clementine Barnabet was really one of a kind, and if you haven't listened to the episode yet, I highly recommend it. Not because I put it together, but because it's just, there's so many unanswered questions, and I would love to hear what you guys think. You can run over to my Facebook page and find the post about that episode and let me know what you guys think about Clementine. I want to know, do you think she was involved? Was she not involved? Because that case was crazy. And I also just want to say thank you because I was not expecting to get as many listens to the podcast on episode 1 as I did. So I'm very thankful for that. And I really appreciate the feedback from people who have reached out to let me know what they thought about that episode. And I really appreciate that you've come back to listen to episode 2. So this episode is the one with the ditches. But before we go into today's case, I do want to take a minute to talk about why I created this podcast. So female offenders are often under-discussed in true crime. And when they are talked about, they're often compared directly to male offenders. But the reality is, women tend to offend differently. And the reason why there's all these comparisons is because statistically, women don't commit violent offenses as often or frequently as their male counterparts. So it makes sense that they're constantly being compared to one another. But the reality is that women offend differently. Their motives, their methods, and the way their behavior develops over time can and does look very different. And we're going to talk about that when we're going through these episodes and talking about these cases. Now, I've always been fascinated by all of this, much to the dismay of my husband, who is probably slightly concerned by that fascination, but don't worry, he's fine. Everything's fine. I can provide proof of life. I promise. I am what I like to call a student for life. I earned my master's degree in criminal justice from Florida State University back in 2019, and I've always loved researching, writing, really digging into these cases, especially when I was getting my master's degree. And even now, in when I'm just doing my normal everyday work stuff, I like to research. I want to know all the things about all of the things. So I considered going back to school to get my doctorates, but realistically, it didn't make sense financially, especially when I realized I could continue doing those same things that I loved, researching, writing, sharing what I've learned. I can do it for free on my own time. And so here we are. This is the podcast. Plus, it's expensive to get a doctorate's degree. I'm pretty sure my husband is much happier with me going this route to fulfill my love of learning instead of adding more student loan debt. Just saying. That's one of the reasons I created this podcast. I wanted a space where I could continue learning, researching, and sharing what I find with others who are just as interested in these cases as I am. Another reason is the mini episodes that I'll be doing in between the full episodes. Those are focused on cold cases involving missing and murdered women. The goal with these mini episodes is to bring attention to cases that need it, because sometimes a case just needs a little more attention for it to move forward. Also, maybe someone will hear about the case and remember something that could help investigators. I can only hope that bringing awareness to those cases will help a family get closure. We do have one mini episode up right now. It's the one with the 3 a.m. screams. That one is about Bethany Doherty, who went missing in 2008 out of Kilowog, New York. Highly recommend listening to that episode, sharing it as much as you can to try to get the word out there. She's been missing. She had 3 kids. They've got no leads. It's a really sad case, and the family deserves justice. Her kids deserve to know what happened to her. So when each episode hits the podcast world, I'll be adding a post on my Facebook page, The True Crime Wife by Jess, with links to articles, pictures associated with the case, links to where additional information can be found, and the links are also included in the description for each podcast episode on whatever podcast app you're using to listen on right now. So, enough about me. Let's get into today's case. Today's case challenges what we think we know about female offenders. This is not a story about quiet violence. It's not about financial gain, and it's not about someone who suddenly lost control. This is a story about escalation, steady control, and a woman who didn't just commit violence, she embraced it, reveled in it, and wanted notoriety from it. Before she became known for something horrific, Joanna Dennehy was just a child, just like all of us were at one point or another. She was born in 1982 and raised in Hertfordshire, England, in the town of Harpenden. Harpenden? I might be saying that wrong, and I'm going to apologize in advance if I butcher any of the names of these towns. I am going to attempt to pronounce them correctly. Anyway, she was born in 1982, raised in Hertfordshire in the town of Harpenden. It's a quiet, middle-class area. By many accounts, her early childhood appeared relatively normal. There were no documented reports of extreme abuse or neglect. Yet, as she got older, something shifted. People who knew her back then described changes during her teen years, right around age 13. She became more rebellious, more aggressive, and increasingly displayed risk-taking behavior. This is also when alcohol started to become a significant part of her life. She would also smoke marijuana and eventually partake in cocaine. For those unfamiliar with substance abuse, sometimes the use of these drugs is to help numb pain, forget trauma, while other times it's an attempt to help get through the day, like by using stimulants. In Joanna's case, she hadn't experienced anything overly traumatic in her childhood. By all standards, her childhood was normal. Nothing stands out. Although it is possible she was looking to try to feel something. Just like looking up for the next high. Then again, she claimed into adulthood that she was sexually abused. And while she's never said who abused her, and she won't talk about the specifics, she's been consistent in that claim. But her family is dead set that never happened. Nothing happened like that to her. So I don't know. If it did happen, it makes sense that she would have turned to substance use. If it didn't happen, it probably just goes along with her, which we'll talk about more, about her whole psychological thing where she needs to be the center of attention and she says things for attention and, whatever. So we'll talk more about Joanna and you guys can decide for yourself what you guys think happened or didn't happen. Like I said, her family wholeheartedly denies that there was ever any sort of abuse, sexual or otherwise. And her sister, who shared a room with her, also denies that any such thing ever happened to her. And they were pretty close when they were young. Joanna became known for attention-seeking behavior and for telling exaggerated or fabricated stories. At one point, she even falsely claimed that she had killed her own father. This was something that she supposedly told someone when she got out of jail from one of her minor stints as she got older. And it's a weird thing to say, right? Like, why would you say that you murdered your own father? Like, he's alive. He's not dead. I get the attention seeking, I guess, but that's a weird thing to say to get attention. What did she have against her father? She's got something against men. She's got something against her father. Something is just not right with Joanna. But again, her sister said everything was great growing up. Everything was good. So honestly, to me, it sounds almost like foreshadowing that she claimed to have killed her own father. It was almost like she was already fantasizing about committing the murders that she would eventually commit. Obviously, it wasn't true that she killed her father, but it shows how she was beginning to shape her identity around violence. As Joanna entered adulthood, her behaviors, chaotic lifestyle, it all intensified. Her relationships were unstable and often transactional. She needed to be getting something out of the relationship. She used people for housing, money, and support. At the age of 14, she moved out of her house and moved in with her boyfriend, John Trainer. He was 20-ish years old at this time, so quite a significant age gap. I'm still not sure how that was a thing or how she got away with that. It would be a big no from me if my daughter ever said she's leaving to go live with her boyfriend. But I don't know how things work in other places. And I think Joanna might have just decided I'm doing this and ran off. Either way, she ended up having 2 children with Trainer. but she was largely absent from their lives. According to an article that was published in 2014 by ITV News, the father of both of Joanna's children is definitely John Trainer. And John was interviewed, and he said that at the time he had known Joanna for over a decade. They met when he was out walking his dog. Remember that for later. He described their relationship as normal at first, but that she would become abusive and occasionally violent and manipulative. John stated that after the birth of their first child, Joanna began disappearing for long periods of time and would come home intoxicated. She would make some changes temporarily, but it was almost like she would get bored. And then she'd be right out to partying again while John took care of the kids. One thing to note is that during both of her pregnancies, she didn't drink, she didn't do any drugs. The entire time she was pregnant, she was a responsible adult. But once the babies were born, she really didn't take to motherhood. And some of the information I found suggests that she really wasn't able to even connect with the kids. Now, in that same article, John described a time when he found Joanna with one of their kids and a neighborhood kid out by the road. Joanna had her top off and her bra out. She was throwing stones at cars. And she told him she was teaching their daughter and the neighborhood girl how to throw the rocks at the cars. So she's not overly responsible at all. He did eventually leave Joanna and took the children with him. Apparently, things escalated quite quickly and quite horribly, which prompted him to take the children and leave. Joanna came home drunk one night and had a knife and was belligerent, stabbing the floor, basically scared the shit out of John. I mean, if somebody comes home with a knife and is stabbing the floor, I'm getting the hell out of there too, just saying. So he ended up leaving with the kids. I honestly don't know if Joanna even cared that they left, although it's reported that she showed up at the school drunk as a skunk and made quite a scene. So there's that. And this happened after he took the kids. So I don't know if like some part of her actually gave a damn, but yeah, either way, drunk as a skunk, showed up at the school, and luckily John took the kids and they were no longer in Joanna's life. So at this point, her lifestyle was already chaotic. And after John and the kids left, it got more chaotic. Heavy alcohol use, drug use, and criminal activity, including theft and burglary. It is important to note, and I want to make this clear, substances did not create her behavior, but they lowered her inhibitions and allowed things to escalate faster. At least that's my opinion. These behaviors were still there, even without the alcohol and drugs. She had started to display odd behaviors as she came into her teen years, and the alcohol and the drugs just intensified those behaviors. And I think if she'd been sober when she started killing, she may have gotten away with things longer than she did. Maybe she would have even been more calculated and had more victims. But that's speculation. Before we talk about the details of the crimes Joanna committed, I want to take a moment to discuss her mental state, because I think it's important for understanding her mindset and the way that her brain worked or didn't work when she committed these murders. So once she was arrested, she would undergo multiple psychiatric evaluations. And there were some very interesting findings. So I'm going to talk about that now because it really puts her crimes into perspective when we talk about them later, and will hopefully give you guys some insight into just how depraved and horrific her crimes were. Joanna showed traits consistent with antisocial personality disorder, which was the diagnosis provided by multiple forensic psychologists and psychiatrists who evaluated her. The reports were consistent across the board, and the diagnosis the same: antisocial personality disorder with psychopathic tendencies. Now, according to the DSM-5, which is used by psychiatrists in the US when diagnosing various mental health conditions and disorders, antisocial personality disorder is defined as a long-term pattern of disregarding and violating the rights of others, beginning in adolescence and continuing into adulthood. This includes behaviors like lying, manipulation, impulsivity, aggression, and a lack of remorse. What does that mean? So, in everyday terms, this looks like someone who constantly hurts others and doesn't feel genuine guilt about it. They can lie easily, they use people, they don't really consider consequences. Someone with this personality disorder is not able to feel feelings at the same depth that other people do. They can mimic the feelings and emotions, but it's all part of that manipulation that they use to get what they want. And this is why these people can blend easily into society. But once you realize, like, oh my God, these are the behaviors that they're exhibiting, it's like, how did I even fall for this? Right? I mean, they display the emotions that they think they need to display, and they use it to their advantage. Now, the prevalence of antisocial personality disorder is high among serial offenders. So, people who have committed crimes over and over again, high prevalence of this disorder among that population. The disorder affects only 2 to 4% of the general population, but is estimated to affect 46 to 84% of inmates. So, however you're looking at this, the general population, very rare to actually come across somebody who has antisocial personality disorder. Now, a vast majority of studies indicate that serial killers, specifically, demonstrate antisocial tendencies and high rates of psychopathy compared to the general population and incarcerated population. Now, another term used to describe Joanna that I actually mentioned just a little bit ago is psychopathy, which isn't an official diagnosis, but it is used to describe more extreme traits. So, a lot of psychologists use the Hare psychopathy checklist to identify psychopathy in individuals. This is a 22-item checklist of perceived personality traits and observable behaviors, and it's used along with an interview of the subject. It was actually developed in the 1970s by a Canadian psychologist, Robert Hare, which is why it's called the Hare Psychopathy Checklist. And again, it's commonly used by psychiatrists and forensic psychologists in their assessment of offenders. And you can actually pull this checklist up online and look at it. I'll include a link in the description for this episode for anyone interested in just taking a look at that to see what that checklist looks like. Don't go in it and start self-evaluating yourself. You're not a psychopath. And if you are, well, you're probably not going to self-diagnose yourself because you're not going to be honest about your answers. Okay? Okay. Psychopathy includes superficial charm, lack of empathy, lack of guilt, manipulation, and shallow emotion. So, a lot of the things that you see in someone with antisocial personality disorder, but on a more extreme level. Psychopathic individuals can appear completely normal, even likable, even charming, which allows them to gain trust. Ted Bundy is an example of another killer who was described as not only having antisocial personality disorder, but he also displayed psychopathic characteristics. So you see where we're going with this. Joanna, in some respects, very similar to Ted Bundy as far as that superficial charm, lack of remorse, that I don't give a shit about anything attitude. But anyway. So, one of the things that I find to be odd about Joanna, especially when you compare her with people who have had similar diagnoses as her, like Ted Bundy, for example, is that Ted Bundy and serial killers like him, who were described as charming, seemed like they were much better at faking it. Their friends and family didn't see their crimes coming. And while Joanna's family and friends might not have seen her as being capable of murder, although there were some, like her children's father, John, who weren't surprised, she definitely had a history of erratic behavior, and it didn't seem like she was trying to fake or charm people. Then again, Joanna is described as someone who could charm people into liking her. She was able to get people to do things for her. Again, if it benefited her, she could be persuasive, charming, manipulative. And we're going to talk about this in a lot more detail because there is so much, y'all, so much. All of her accomplices were men, by the way, just like her victims. And all of these men did exactly what she wanted. She didn't threaten them at all. Just throwing that out there. So there was something about this girl that was charming. So the final piece of Joanna's mental state that I want to mention is that Joanna also displayed signs of sadistic tendencies, meaning she didn't just want control, She wanted to dominate and experience something from the violence itself. We're going to see this when we talk about one of her victims because the sadism was very evident, and it's really just sad what she did to this guy. Honestly, the crimes that she committed, this wasn't a sudden break. At no point would there be a narrator in any of these documentaries going, and then she just snapped. That wasn't the case for Joanna. This was a progression. There was no snap. In 2013, that progression turned deadly. 3 men would be murdered in the span of only around 10 days, and 2 others would be victims of attempted murder. On March 19th, 2013, 31-year-old Lukas Slabaszewski, I don't know how to say it, it's Polish, so Lukas is Lukaszz, and Slabaszewski is Slaboszewki. He was Joanna's first victim. Now, Lukas, like I said, was from Poland and had known Joanna for a short period of time. It's clear from investigations and reports that he believed that he and Joanna were an item of some sort. He had even told his friends and family that he had met a nice girl. I don't think Joanna felt the same way. Again, she was very transactional in her relationships, if you can call them that, and it just didn't seem genuine on her end. Prior to his death, Lukas was last seen on closed-circuit television getting money out of an ATM, and this was just before he had gone to meet Joanna. Apparently, they'd made plans to meet up that day, and Joanna had actually messaged Lukas and asked him to meet her. So Joanna planned this interaction out. When Lukas arrived, she convinced him to put on a blindfold as some sort of game, and then she stabbed him multiple times. This was a sustained, close-range attack. And it's just awful and horrible what happened to him. Lukas was described by family and friends as someone who was just trying to make it. He was trying to improve himself. He was a nice person. No one had anything horrible to say. Which, for those of you who are wondering how to survive and not be featured on Dateline, just make it impossible for someone to say that about you. If someone can say, she's such a nice person, you could be the victim. It really sucks that so many victims of murderers and serial killers and violent crimes are nice people. Why can't they target the scumbags? Why? Now, after killing Lukas, Joanna needed help with the body because she's not a big girl, and moving a dead human male body isn't going to be easy. So she elicited help from one of her accomplices, Gary Stretch. And we're going to talk about him more in a minute because he helped out in this case quite a bit. He came over and he helped put Lukas's body in a garbage bin. They kept the body in the bin for a short period of time. Joanna showed Lukas's body to a 14-year-old girl that she had befriended in the neighborhood. Can you imagine? I'm still not sure why the girl didn't report it or why Joanna showed it to her or what their relationship was, but it did come out after the case was publicized and after she had been arrested that she had shown a 14-year-old girl in the neighborhood this dead body. Completely messed up. Like, what? I'm telling you, this girl, Joanna, there's something wrong with her. So Joanna and Gary finally move Lukas's body to a ditch near Thorny Dyke in Cambridgeshire. A few days, he was in this townhouse, apartment building, whatever complex, in a garbage bin outside. A few days. It's just absolutely horrible. So now that was March 19th. So now we're on March 28th, possibly the early hours of March 29th in 2013. So only 10-ish days later, would kill again. So there was a short cooling off period, but it was definitely evident that she had gotten a taste for the kill. And she didn't wait long before selecting her next victim. Her next victim would be her housemate, 56-year-old John Chapman. He was murdered in his room, and he may have been passed out at the time. We know that John had his own demons that he was battling. He had alcohol problems, but he was well thought of by his friends and family. He was a hard worker and he was kind. John had also served in the Royal Navy. According to court records, John was killed definitely in his room on his bed. And the sentencing remarks provided by the court, because those are actually public and you can look them up online. I'll include a link to those court records because it is very thorough and really details the entire outline of this case. But in terms of John Chapman, the court states, quote, "You stabbed John Chapman to death in his own bed sitting room. You stabbed him once in the neck, severing the carotid artery, and 5 times in the chest. 2 of the stab wounds penetrated the heart, one of them inflicted with sufficient force to pass first through the breastbone. There was no injury to suggest that John Chapman attempted to defend himself. His blood alcohol level was 4 times the limit for driving." End quote. So what I got from that is Joanna killed a helpless man who was passed out. And from the description provided by the court, it's clear that she didn't hold back. This murder was just as frenzied as Lucas's. And while we don't have a clear motive for any of the murders Joanna committed, there are some theories. And while we're talking about Lucas and John, let's talk about a couple of those theories right now. For Lucas's, Joanna had made comments about wanting to know what it was like to kill. This was something that she mentioned during her forensic evaluations after she was arrested. So maybe she just was curious. I'm going to kill this guy and see what it's like. And then she got the taste for it. Now, with John Chapman, Joanna claimed he had come into the bathroom at some point while she was taking a bath and refused to leave. Now, whether this actually happened or not is up for debate. She was known as being a pathological liar and would say just about anything to get attention, sympathy, or to further her own cause. So with Lucas, it was most likely she just wanted to kill someone. So she's like, he'll do. With John, she's claiming she was in the bathtub. He came in, wouldn't leave, made her uncomfortable, so she killed him. I have a hard time believing that just based on all of these other lies and things that she tells. But who knows? Could have been maybe he was drunk and had to pee. We don't know. So after killing John, Joanna used his phone to call Gary Stretch again, because Mr. Gary is going to be her goon here, and also used his cell phone to take photographs of the body. So she took John's phone after killing him, called her accomplice to come help get rid of the body, and in the meantime, while she's waiting for him to get there, she took pictures of John's dead, lifeless body. Literally, if you were to look up psychopath in the dictionary, Joanna's face should be right next to it. She is the definition of the word. But that wasn't it. It wasn't just those 2 murders, guys. There was a 3rd murder. But before we talk about the 3rd murder, let's talk about Joanna's accomplices, because their involvement in all of this is interesting, and it gets even more interesting as we go on. There's a lot of moving parts in this whole story, so hopefully we can keep this all together and stay on track. Now, one of the things that we see in a lot of cases with female serial offenders or serial killers, we see them working with male companions. But usually, the men are the dominant ones, and the female is just doing what they're told. We see that across the board. We've seen it in tons of cases. That wasn't the case here. Joanna was clearly the dominant person in this weird relationship that she had with these men. She was the one calling the shots. So let's talk about Gary. Gary Stretch, which is not his real name, but we're going to call him Gary Stretch. His full name was Gary Richards. But he was a 7'3" tall man. And yes, that is accurate. 7'3" tall, which is why he got the nickname Gary Stretch. He was not a small man by any means. He easily, and this is what gets me the most about Mr. Gary Stretch, is I don't know what she had on him or how infatuated he must have been with her, but he could have stopped her at any point and prevented more killing or prevented the killings. But he didn't do anything. He could have snapped her like a twig. He's huge. 7'3". I am 5'5", and I can't even imagine if somebody's like 5'8". I'm like, oh my gosh, you're like a tree. I can't. So, he's not afraid of her. So it's not like he can be like, oh, I was so afraid that she was going to hurt me. No, that's not a thing either, because he's huge. He could have punted her across the field or something and everything would have been fine. So Gary Stretch, it doesn't sound like he was present for the first two murders. So when Lucas and John Chapman were killed, Gary wasn't there. She had to call him for help. But he didn't try to raise the alarm or call anyone to report what had happened. He just went along with it. So it's pretty clear that he was smitten with her. Although that seems to have been one-sided because, as we know, Joanna is all about Joanna. So, yeah. Gary was definitely way more invested in whatever this relationship was than Joanna was. But again, she was able to get something from him, help moving bodies. So who knows what she was doing with him? Maybe there were some sexual favors going on. I don't know. And I really don't care. He was basically her giant goon. So that's Gary Stretch. And then we have Leslie Layton. And he is someone who he claimed to be a victim in all of this, way more so than Gary did when they were all arrested. But Leslie Layton claims that he only participated out of fear for his own life. He claimed to be completely innocent in all of this, and I don't buy it, but Leslie Layton, let's talk about Mr. Layton. So, Leslie was also living in the same building as Joanna and John. I'm not sure of his involvement with the murder or disposal of Lucas's body, but it is clear from court records that Leslie was in the home at some point shortly after John was murdered, because there was forensics that they were able to retrieve that showed that he'd been there. There's a photo of John's body found on Leslie's cell phone that had been deleted at one point, and the forensics, they were able to go back and get that. Because digital footprint. Nothing is deleted, guys. Just, if you delete it, it is not gone. Once it has been created and is out in the world, it is there forever. It can be retrieved. Just, these criminals, sometimes they just don't think, and they're so stupid. But anyway, Leslie. Oh, Leslie. I just lost my train of thought on that one. So Leslie Layton. Man, the photo that they found on his phone was taken at 7:32 a.m. the morning of the 29th. And, that's around the time that it's suspected that John Chapman was murdered, sometime between the night of the 28th and the early mornings of the 29th. And that photo was on Leslie's phone at 7:32 a.m. So I'm thinking he was there either during the murder or very shortly after he showed up. Regardless of when he got there or when he saw John's body, he didn't call for help. He didn't report it. Instead, he left the house and went shopping with a friend. He left and went shopping. So if he left and went shopping and then he's claiming that he was so scared of Joanna, to me, that's the perfect time to go to the police. Like, you're safe. You're away from her. She can't hurt you. So this guy is completely full of you know what. So Leslie would actually participate in getting rid of John Chapman's body, and he still didn't do anything. This guy is so involved. And the courts agreed. So I can probably jump off that soapbox. I just can't believe, why would you? I get you got to come up with a defense, but seriously. Anyway, those were her two main accomplices. And while there are some other accomplices, those are the two that I'm going to focus on because there was more information about them. They were more heavily involved. They actually moved bodies. And Joanna's third victim. Her third victim was her landlord, and they were having an affair. Kevin was married, and his name's Kevin Lee. He was 48 years old, married. He had children. He was a property owner and a landlord. I'm not 100% sure how Kevin and Joanna met, but what I do know is that over the course of several months, Kevin and Joanna started to have an affair. The courts described Kevin's feelings for Joanna as infatuation, which is how I would describe a lot of the men in her life who had feelings for her. They were infatuated. According to court documents, Joanna convinced Kevin that she had been abused as a child and had killed her own father. They were so close that when she killed Lucas, she called Gary to help her move the body, but she told Kevin what had happened. So, which is, again, why it's kind of strange that she decided to kill him, but we'll see more here in just a minute. So on March 29th, 2013, so literally the same day that they had killed John Chapman, Joanna decided Kevin's not that great. Or maybe she just really wanted to kill him. Or, maybe she needed to get rid of him because she told him about killing someone. Whatever the reason, she lured him to 11 Rolliston Garth in order to murder him. That was the only reason that she wanted him there. She also allegedly told Kevin that when he came to see her that Friday, that she was going to dress him up and rape him. What? So this was even before John was murdered, or if it happened that day, it was like that morning, the morning of the 29th, she messaged him or called him or something and was like, hey, when you come over tonight, we're going to dress you up and I'm going to rape you. That's what she said. And we know that this actually happened because he told his best friend, Dave Church. He spoke to him that same day and said, hey, Joanna said this to me. Which, that seems weird to me. Like, why would you tell your friend that? But apparently it wasn't the first time that Kevin had told Dave about Joanna's tastes and the things that they did together in the bedroom. So I guess guy talk. Joanna was pretty weird, and the things that she liked in the bedroom, she had kind of a reputation. So, maybe he was bragging a bit like, oh, this is what she said to me. I'm going to have a good night. Kevin arrives at the home. We aren't sure exactly what transpired, but we do know that at some point he is put in, or she puts on him, a black sequin dress. He was then stabbed 5 times in the chest, penetrating his lungs and heart. Court records state that in this case, unlike the others, Kevin tried to defend himself. This is the only time where we see those defensive wounds in her murder victims, is when she killed Kevin. And again, it's not 100% clear why Joanna decided to kill Kevin Lee of all the people. But according to the court records, she did tell a woman named Georgina Page, who was like a friend of theirs, that it was because he'd seen the body. I mean, she's telling everybody about these bodies, by the way. Like, she meets a friend. She's like, yeah, I killed someone. Yeah, I killed 2 people. She's just bragging about it. Crazy. So, honestly, I'm sure that was part of the reason. But realistically, I think she'd also just gotten a taste for killing, and she was bored and wanted to, and he was an easy target. Another thing to note is that Kevin was the 3rd victim, and he was the only one who they disposed of his body in an absolutely humiliating manner. It really was horrible. I really feel for Kevin's family. I mean, his wife especially didn't know that there was an affair going on until after he was found murdered and all of this stuff came out. I mean, this was a lot. This really ruined their family. And he was found in the black sequin dress. He was placed in the ditch where he was disposed with the dress up over him, exposing his full backside. Like, full moon, you could see everything. Just really messed up. It was very clear that, at least in this particular case with Kevin Lee, she wanted to embarrass him and humiliate him in whatever manner possible. And I think she fulfilled that. And it's, again, she's sadistic. She's a psychopath, and goodness gracious, she was something, huh? Now, after killing Kevin, Joanna had 2 bodies to get rid of. She still had John Chapman's body, so she elicited the help of Gary Stretch. Again, like, we're surprised. That same evening, Leslie Layton would also arrive and be part of the disposal of both John Chapman's body and Kevin Lee's. So they traveled to a remote area on the outskirts of Peterborough and dumped the body of Kevin Lee. He was still wearing that sequin dress, and again, humiliating position. I won't go over it again. They also had taken his vehicle. He had a Mondeo, and they set it on fire. So after setting the fire to the car and disposing of Kevin Lee's body, Leslie, Gary, and Joanne returned to 38 Byfield, where the body of John Chapman was, and then loaded him into the car, and his body was then dumped at Thorny Dyke in the same ditch near Lucas's body. None of the actions taken by Joanna during this period, by the way, involved panic. There was zero evidence of panic or an, oh my God, what do I do now after these murders? She was fully in control. And she not only had control of the situation, she had multiple men that she was in control of who were doing whatever she asked them to, without question. If she said jump, they jumped. If she said go jump off that bridge, they are the people that would have jumped off the bridge because she said so. I have zero doubts about that. Kevin Lee's body was actually found the day after. So on March 30th, the police started speaking to people who may have seen him or known where he was going. He was initially reported missing by his wife, and then he was found. Now, John Chapman at this point was also missing, and the police were asking questions about him as well because, nobody's seen him. At one point over that Easter weekend, they questioned Leslie Layton, who this was a good opportunity for him to tell the police what he knew about where John Chapman was and what had happened to Kevin Lee, because Joanna and Gary were far away at that point in another town. Instead, he lied, and he covered for them, and even claimed he hadn't seen Joanna since the prior Wednesday. Again, to me, this just feeds into this theory that he was a willing participant in all of this and is just as guilty as the other two. By April 2nd, so this all happened, these bodies all have been disposed of by March 29th. Kevin Lee is found March 30th. John Chapman is reported missing, but no body has been found. And then April 2nd, so it's been a couple of days. They've gotten through the weekend. Joanna knows at this point that she's probably going to be wanted or is wanted at this point for murder, especially when they found Kevin. Now, according to a friend, we're going to talk about Georgina Page, Joanna was ecstatic. Apparently, Joanna and Gary went and stayed with Georgina over this weekend, and Georgina was terrified. And I fully believe that she was terrified of these two. She testified during court that Joanna was ecstatic about the idea and the concept of being wanted by the police. And apparently, while Joanna and Gary were staying with her, they spoke candidly about the murders. And prior to leaving, Gary made it clear to Georgina that if she told the police about them, that he'd make sure she was taken care of. And this does come up during the trial. Like, Georgina, why didn't you say anything? And she did testify that she understood what Gary had said to her to mean that she would be killed if she went to the police. So she'd been threatened. She was terrified. So she didn't say anything. On April 2nd, 2013, Joanna and Gary leave Georgina's and they get into Joanna's car. Now, Gary's driving, even though this was a car that belonged to Joanna, because I don't think Joanna knows how to drive, or she just doesn't drive. Gary is always the one driving. And quick fact as well, that car that Joanna has, the money for it was given to her by Kevin Lee. Yeah. So the car that she used to get rid of bodies, including Kevin's, was purchased by her, or for her, essentially by him. And just, yeah, she sucks. Joanna made Gary drive them to Hereford, where she would end up attacking two more men at random. Now, before more murder happened, or attempted murder happened, Joanna and Gary commit some burglaries. They steal some electrical items that can easily be sold, and at this point, they both just really don't care. They were both wanted. So after burglarizing some homes, they met some other criminals at a flat in Kington, which is about 20 miles from Hereford on the Welsh border. Gary and Joanna agreed to sell the stolen property to someone in Hereford, and Joanna and Gary would meet the man there. That man was Mark Lloyd. Mark is actually interviewed extensively on this docuseries episode Manhunt, Joanna Dennehy. You can view it on Prime Video. That's where I watched it. And he provides a lot of insight into what would happen that day from the time that he meets up with them to the time that they're arrested. Now, according to Mark Lloyd, he arrives at an apartment to meet Gary and Joanna. He had done some prison time with Gary, which is how they knew each other, and he apparently could get rid of stolen equipment. When he arrives there, Joanna started to basically brag about what she'd done. Again, honestly, that didn't surprise me. Knowing what we know about Joanna, her bragging about the murders is just like normal conversation for her at this point. Mark claims that while he and Gary Stretch were in the kitchen, Gary showed him a handgun and basically told him he needed to do what they said because Joanne would kill him otherwise. So now Mark's being threatened. Georgina was, and now Mark has been as well. Mark eventually leaves with Gary and Joanna because he didn't feel like he had a choice. They were like, hey, let's go. We're leaving. And so he gets in the car with them, and he knows Gary has a gun. And he knows Joanna has confessed to 3 murders in front of him at this point, so she's a crazy person. The court states in the paperwork that they do not believe that he was a willing passenger in the vehicle when it set off for Hereford. So they completely believe his story that he was basically being held against his will at this point. Now, Mark Lloyd describes the fear that he had in the vehicle with Gary and Joanna, and that Joanna was telling Gary to find her a man with a dog. She wanted to kill a man with a dog, not a woman, not a child. She wanted a man, and she wanted Gary to find someone for her. And Gary followed through. There's no doubt in my mind that this guy was not afraid of Joanna. He wasn't worried she'd hurt him, and he was a very willing participant in all of this, like we've said before. But anyway, according to Mark Lloyd, Gary spots the first victim of the day, Robin Bereza. He was walking his dog, and Mark told the jury at trial that he heard Gary say to Joanna, "Will he do?" Which obviously he did, because Joanna gets out of the car. So Robin Bereza was a 63-year-old man. He was a retired fireman. He had a daily routine. He was very fit. And normally his routine was to go for a jog every day. But that day he had opted to take his dog for a walk for exercise instead. Joanna got out of the car, walked up to him, and I'm sure he wasn't alarmed at all by this. I mean, anyone who's out walking a dog, we want to talk about our dogs and show them off. So if someone comes up and looks like they're interested in our dog, we're very happy to say hello. It would not be that type of situation this time, though. Joanna walks up to him and attacks Robin, stabbing him first in the back, then a second time in the right upper arm, mercilessly. According to Robin, who survived, he asked Joanna what she was doing, and she said, and this part's hard, "I want to hurt you. I'm going to fucking kill you." Which is absolutely terrifying. She doesn't know this man. This man doesn't know her. He's just out walking his dog. And this crazy woman comes up and is like, "I'm going to kill you." So even though she was only able to stab him twice, the wound to his back penetrated the chest wall and bruised his lung, and it fractured a rib. He had blood and air in his chest cavity that had to be drained. So if he hadn't received immediate medical treatment, he wouldn't have survived. Luckily, there were witnesses who called for help, and he was able to get the medical treatment that he needed. Though I am sure that this attack undoubtedly left not only physical wounds, but psychological ones as well. Now, when Joanna eventually stopped attacking Robin and returned to the car where Gary and Mark were, she wasn't happy or satisfied with the attack. She wanted to kill someone. So she told Gary to find her someone else. And he did. The second victim was another dog walker, 56-year-old John Rogers. When Gary pointed out John Rogers, Joanna got out of the vehicle and attacked him from behind, stabbing him in the back. When he turned around, she continued to stab him repeatedly. According to the reports, she pushed him backwards for several yards and continued to stab him. This was a shocking, merciless attack. When she stopped attacking him, she took it a step further and took his dog before getting back in the vehicle. So now she stabbed this man and stolen his dog. John Rogers was stabbed more than 30 times. Absolutely insane. His wounds were profound. He had deep wounds to the chest, to his abdomen, and his back. Both of his lungs had collapsed. He had 9 ribs that were fractured. And he also received wounds to his hands and arms, which resulted in irreparable nerve damage. And just like in the case of Robin, if he had not received prompt medical treatment, he almost definitely would have died from his injuries. But luckily, that was not the case, and he did survive. So now Joanna has killed 3 people. She has attempted to kill 2 more people, and she doesn't know that they're not dead yet. She just knows that, she's stabbed them quite a bit. They're arrested shortly after. So police surround the vehicle, took all 3 of them into custody. Mark Lloyd, Gary Stretch, Joanna Dennehy, and they were expecting a fight. The police were, but Joanna didn't put up a fight. She got out of that vehicle so calm, she put the knife down, and she went with the police like it was just a random drive to the store. At the time of the arrest, she had that knife, and the stolen dog was still with her as well. Now, according to her own statements, while she was being processed, She had been drinking heavily leading up to the arrest, which Mark Lloyd confirms in his recount of everything that happened when he was in the vehicle that day. She was drinking a lot. Even though she'd been drinking, her behavior in custody was, I don't even know how to describe it. It was odd, unusual, not what you'd expect from someone who was arrested for attempted murder and murder. I'm not really sure how to describe it. If you watch that documentary episode, the manhunt one, they show footage of her as she's being booked, and she definitely doesn't act like someone who was just arrested for murder. She's laughing, she's making jokes, she's flirting. She flirts with the officers, the man and the women. She's flirting with everybody. She showed no remorse at all. She even comments on the clothes like, "Oh, I don't know if this is my color," or, "Oh, this looks good. Thank you so much." It's really disturbing. Like her whole demeanor. I've never seen someone get arrested and act like that ever. It's weird. Now, when it came time for court, Joanna threw investigators and the prosecution for a loop. She pled guilty. They were expecting this lengthy trial and hearing and this whole thing. And while they still had to do like a trial and like present evidence and stuff to the jury and the judge so that they could make an informed decision for sentencing, they didn't have to go through as much as they would have had she not just pled guilty. Like she was just like, "Yep, I did it." She pled guilty to everything. All 3 murders and both attempted murders. Like it wasn't even a thing. So I think that she did this as another way to be in control. Yeah, I don't know. She's a weird one, but I'll provide a link on my Facebook page, True Crime Wife by Jess, to the court document that outlines the case from start to finish, along with the sentencing for those involved, which I'm going to go over them. But that court document really goes into detail about everything. I mean, it's a solid read there if you're wanting to go down that rabbit hole. Now, when she's in court, Joanna appears defiant and emotionless. Exactly what you'd expect from somebody who's on trial for murder. But at times, she laughed. She showed no visible remorse and no acknowledgement of the lives that she had taken. She was just cold. Wouldn't have known that she was in there for murder. So let's talk about the sentencing here. So Joanne was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, meaning she will never be released from prison. This is a rare sentence in the UK for women. There's only 4 women who've ever received a full life sentence there with no possibility of parole. So she was found guilty. So she had those 3 murders and 2 attempted murders, along with offenses for preventing burial, which included sentences of 12 years each to run concurrent with her life sentence. She's never getting out of jail, ever. She's in there for good. Thank goodness. Now, Gary Stretch was found guilty of attempted murder and of 3 offenses of preventing burial, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 19 years. This means that after 19 years, he would be eligible for parole if the parole board chose to release him. If released, he would be on parole for the rest of his life. Leslie Layton was found guilty of 2 counts of preventing the lawful and decent burial of bodies and was given 2 concurrent sentences of 10 years imprisonment. He was also found guilty of perverting the course of justice and was sentenced another 4 years for that offense, for a total of 14 years. He is required to serve 1/2 of that sentence in prison, and then upon release, he would spend the remainder on probation, subject to recall or re-imprisonment if he commits any further offenses. So they all got sentences. I don't think Leslie's was long enough, but it is what it is. So let's talk about prison life for Joanna. After sentencing, she's placed in a high security prison. At one point, she's housed in the same facility as Rose West. And if you don't know Rose West, she's one of the UK's most notorious female killers. And I might cover that one at some point for those who aren't familiar, but that case is a doozy as well. And when it comes to Rose West and Joanna Dennehy being in the same prison together, things get interesting. According to reports and accounts discussed in documentaries about Joanna Dennehy, Rose West, who herself is responsible for multiple murders, was reportedly unsettled by Joanna. There are claims that Rose West found Joanna intimidating, even frightening, and there are also rumors that Joanna threatened to kill Rose West. And that says a lot, because Rose West is not someone who is easily intimidated. Even the suggestion that someone like Rose West would feel uneasy around Joanna Dennehy adds another layer to how extreme her behavior and personality were perceived to be, even among the worst offenders. She stands out, and not in a good way. Honestly, the case of Joanna Dennehy hits different. And until recently, I'd never even heard of her. Like, honestly, I'd never heard of her until I started this podcast. But her case is fascinating. With a lot of killers, there's some sort of trauma in their past, like abuse as a child or neglect. But that wasn't the case here, at least according to, friends and family. And I'm still torn on whether she was ever abused. Maybe it was by somebody that the family didn't know, like they just didn't know that it happened. But then again, she's a pathological liar. I think there's just something broken in her, honestly. Now, remember, female serial killers are rare. And most use less confrontational methods like poisoning, and typically they target people that they know. Their motives are often tied to financial gain, control, or attention. Joanna Dennehy doesn't fit the pattern. Yet another reason why this case is so different from other female serial killers. She didn't kill for any other reason other than to do it, and for the notoriety that would come from having murdered people. There are some cases where female killers worked with a male partner who dominated them and essentially controlled their actions and behavior. Also not the case here. While Joanna had a male partner in crime, or partners, she was definitely the one doing the killing and calling the shots. And it wasn't just that one man that she was essentially controlling. She controlled multiple men who participated in various aspects of her crime. She used direct, extreme violence. She targeted both people she knew and strangers. And her motivation was not financial, it was experiential. She was in it for the experience, and she enjoyed it. Most crimes come with a motive we can understand. This one doesn't, because sometimes the reason isn't money or revenge or fear. Sometimes the reason is simply that they wanted to. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of True Crime Wife by Jess. If you want to hear more stories like this, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps the show grow. I also love reading the reviews and getting feedback directly from you all, the listeners, so that I can continue to improve and provide the best possible podcast experience for all of you lovely people. If you want more information about this case, check out my Facebook page, True Crime Wife by Jess, and follow for podcast updates and additional content. And as always, remember that every crime has a breaking point, and every woman has a line she never thought she'd cross. Until she does. I'll see you in the next episode.